Have you ever saved a single dollar and immediately felt like it made absolutely no meaningful difference in your financial future at all? Most Americans feel that way because small amounts seem painfully insignificant when rent, groceries, and monthly bills keep rising every single year. You work hard for every paycheck, yet $5 saved feels pointless when everything around you keeps getting more expensive in frustrating ways. But what if I told you that tiny amounts of money can quietly reshape your future in ways far bigger than you imagine right now? And what if the thing holding you back financially is not your income, but the psychology behind how you treat small financial wins daily? My name is Max, and I spend an unreasonable amount of time studying money behavior and how average Americans can escape financial stress permanently. If you have ever felt broke, behind, overwhelmed, or convinced that building wealth requires huge income, this message will change your perspective today. Because the truth almost nobody tells you is that wealth rarely begins with big dramatic decisions, but with tiny consistent choices repeated patiently. Before we dive into the deeper math and psychology, we need to talk about why millions of Americans feel financially stuck right now. According to the Federal Reserve's 2024 SHED report, nearly 40% of Americans cannot cover a $400 emergency without borrowing money. Bankrate's 2024 study also shows that 57% of people cannot pay a $1,000 surprise expense from savings alone. This means most families are one car repair away from panic, one medical bill away from credit card debt, and one missed paycheck away from crisis. Living like this creates constant stress because your entire life becomes reactive instead of proactive, as fear drives every financial decision you make. When every dollar immediately disappears to bills, you begin believing you have no control, no flexibility, and definitely no chance to save meaningfully. And this belief slowly transforms into a dangerous identity, where you begin seeing yourself as someone who just can't get ahead financially. But here's the twist that changes everything. Because the real problem usually isn't income, but the lack of any financial margin whatsoever. When you have no margin, even tiny expenses feel like disasters, and even tiny wins feel useless, which keeps you trapped in the same exhausting loop. But building that margin does not require thousands of dollars. It often begins with the smallest possible win, repeated consistently and intentionally. Research from behavioral psychology shows that small wins create a measurable dopamine response that boosts motivation and self-trust over time. This is why saving your first $20 feels more powerful than planning to save 500. You will never actually follow through on. Your brain responds to evidence, not intentions, which means small actions build confidence while large unrealistic goals create guilt and paralysis. Wealth begins when your identity shifts from "I'm trying to save" toward "I am someone who saves," because identity determines long-term behavior. Think about how people who see themselves as runners feel naturally motivated to run even on difficult days, because identity drives consistency. Money works exactly the same way because once you believe you are a saver, every decision you make begins aligning with that identity effortlessly. But let's get practical because theory alone doesn't help unless it connects to your real day-to-day financial life meaningfully. Imagine you buy coffee at a drive-thru 3 times a week, spending around $7 each visit because prices increased again last year. If you skip just one coffee each week, you save $28 monthly without feeling deprived or sacrificing your quality of life drastically. If you cut a streaming service you rarely use, that might free up another $15 monthly without creating any real discomfort whatsoever. If you switch to a cheaper phone plan, something millions of Americans already did in 2024, you might save another $20 to $40 monthly. None of these choices feel dramatic individually, but together they create a micro surplus powerful enough to change your financial direction quickly. That micro surplus is what you use to pay yourself first, which means saving before spending instead of the other way around. Paying yourself first flips your mindset from reactive to proactive because you prioritize your future before your bills consume everything automatically. Let's talk about the first major milestone that transforms your psychology more than most people realize, which is saving your first $1,000. The Federal Reserve reports that households with at least $1,000 saved experience significantly lower financial stress and anxiety overall. The number itself isn't magical, but the psychological safety is because you suddenly shift from constant fear toward cautious confidence in emergencies. Instead of panicking when a tire blows or your pet needs a vet visit, you know you can handle it without turning to credit cards immediately. And this small layer of security changes how you think, how you plan, and how disciplined you become with money moving forward. But now let's get mathematical because most people severely underestimate how powerful small, consistent contributions can be over long periods. Let's say you save $50 every month, which is roughly one fancy coffee every 3 days or one dinner out skipped monthly. You invest it into a simple index fund, earning an average of 7% annually, which is conservative compared to long-term S&P performance. After the first year, you have around $600 saved, and your investment gains are only about $30, which feels insignificant. After 5 years, you have approximately $3,400, most of which you contributed yourself through steady, consistent action. After 10 years, your balance grows to around $8,000, again mostly powered by your habit rather than extraordinary market returns. After 15 years, your account reaches roughly $13,500 with compound interest, beginning to accelerate the growth. After 20 years, your balance grows to nearly $19,500, and your returns alone approach $2,000 that year. Notice something important because your contribution stayed at $50 monthly while your returns increased without additional effort. This is the moment when your money begins working harder for you than you are working for it, which is the entire purpose of compounding. And if you increased your monthly contribution to $100, those numbers would roughly double over the same timeline, effortlessly. Most Americans never experience this because they quit early during the boring phase when nothing seems to be growing fast enough. Compounding is slow at the beginning, painfully slow, discouragingly slow, yet explosively powerful after years of patient consistency and discipline. Think of it like pushing a heavy flywheel where the first few turns feel impossible, but later momentum makes everything far easier. But compounding is not the only benefit, because your entire identity begins evolving once you stack several small wins together consistently. When you save your first $100, you feel proud, and that pride makes saving the next 100 significantly easier psychologically. By the time you have a few hundred saved, you begin noticing unnecessary spending habits naturally because your mindset shifts toward long-term thinking. Once you reach $500 or $1,000, you gain confidence because you finally have visible proof that you can build something meaningful. This identity shift becomes the most important part because behavior follows identity far more reliably than motivation ever could. People who identify as savers find creative ways to save, while people who believe they can't save unconsciously sabotage their progress constantly. Identity determines choices because your brain wants consistency between who you believe you are and what you actually do daily. Now, let's talk about what actually improves in your life when these small wins begin stacking over time consistently and patiently. The first major change is stress reduction because financial stress triggers constant cortisol, which damages sleep, mood, and overall mental health. Studies from the American Psychological Association show that money remains the #1 source of stress for most adults in the United States. But even having a small emergency fund significantly reduces overall stress because your brain finally feels protected instead of vulnerable. The second major change is improved decision-making because being broke forces you to choose based on urgency instead of long-term benefit. When you have savings, you can turn down toxic jobs, avoid predatory loans, and make thoughtful decisions instead of desperate ones. The third change is confidence because savings create a psychological foundation that increases your sense of control and personal stability. According to Fidelity's 2024 wellness study, people with savings feel far more confident during job negotiations or career transitions overall. The fourth change is opportunity because when you are not drowning financially, you finally have the bandwidth to notice and evaluate new possibilities. This is why financially stable people seem lucky, but it's really because they have enough margin to make smart decisions without panic. Meanwhile, people living paycheck to paycheck feel forced into choices they dislike because survival always overrides long-term planning. But here's something equally important, which is that small wins must remain sustainable because extreme saving strategies always backfire eventually. If saving feels like punishment or deprivation, your brain will rebel and eventually quit because discipline cannot survive constant misery. The goal is not to cut all joy, but to create small adjustments that build habits without destroying your quality of life completely. Cooking at home 2 extra nights weekly is sustainable while eliminating all meals out is unrealistic and guaranteed to collapse eventually. Skipping 1 weekly coffee is sustainable while banning all coffee purchases is unnecessarily extreme and psychologically discouraging instantly. Sustainable small wins create decades of progress while extreme financial crash diets burn out quickly and destroy consistency overall. Think of this like fitness because a person who walks daily for years becomes far healthier than someone who does a brutal workout once. Money works the same way because consistency beats intensity every single time, especially when building long-term financial stability. Now, let's expand the timeline because people underestimate just how powerful steady habits become after several years of commitment. In the first year, the biggest benefit is psychological because you start trusting yourself and building discipline through repeated small actions. In the second year, your habits feel natural and less forced because you no longer debate every financial decision emotionally. By the third year, your identity has shifted, and you now see yourself as someone who saves consistently regardless of temporary inconvenience. By the fifth year, your savings actually look meaningful because compound interest and disciplined contributions finally create visible results. By the seventh or eighth year, you start experiencing real financial security because you have an emergency fund, investments, and strong habits. By the 10th year, your money is working for you, and your returns might even exceed the amount you contribute annually. And by the 15th year, the compounding becomes shockingly powerful because decades of discipline turn tiny wins into real wealth. This process works regardless of income because it is based on behavior, not advantage, and identity, not financial luck. Many wealthy people today started from difficult circumstances but relied on consistent small wins and long-term thinking to build everything. If you look at people who successfully escape financial stress, almost all of them began with extremely small steps they followed consistently. They didn't wait for perfect conditions because waiting creates stagnation, while small action creates momentum and builds internal confidence. Building wealth is far more accessible than most people believe because behavior outperforms income when time and consistency are on your side. You don't need to earn six figures to build savings. You only need to create small, predictable habits that compound over years. But here's the challenge because the most important phase of wealth building happens early when your account looks painfully small. Saving feels pointless when you only have $70 or $100 or $300 because progress feels invisible. This discouraging phase is where most people quit because they mistake slow progress for failure instead of recognizing compounding takes time. Wealthy people push through this early stage because they understand the long-term payoff even when the short-term results look tiny. They treat saving like brushing their teeth, which means it's something they do automatically regardless of how they feel that day. They understand that identity is built through repeated evidence, not through motivation or emotional bursts that fade quickly. During the early years, results don't motivate you. Discipline and identity do because motivation is unreliable and inconsistent. The boring phase separates people who eventually build wealth from people who remain stuck in financial stress for decades. But once your savings reach a few $1,000s, everything becomes easier because you finally see proof that your system is working. This proof generates excitement, which then increases your motivation and strengthens your identity as a person who consistently saves money. At this point, your financial decisions become intentional rather than emotional because saving becomes a natural part of your lifestyle. You begin noticing opportunities to optimize your spending without even trying because your brain automatically filters decisions through your new identity. You stop buying things out of boredom or stress because spending no longer feels like relief when your real identity values long-term security. You start asking different questions like whether this purchase supports your future self or takes away from long-term stability. And these identity-based questions build even more consistent behavior, which strengthens your financial foundation with every small decision. Eventually, your mindset shifts completely because money no longer feels like something that controls you, but something you control intentionally. With savings, you gain the power to make thoughtful decisions instead of decisions forced by urgency and desperation. This is why even a $1,000 emergency fund creates such a dramatic psychological shift according to multiple 2024 studies. Now, let's talk about how to apply this concept right now, even if your current financial situation feels overwhelming or hopeless. The best way to begin is choosing one extremely small financial win that feels almost effortless so your brain does not resist the change. It could be saving $20 weekly, skipping one restaurant meal, or canceling a subscription you barely use anymore. The key is choosing something sustainable because sustainability matters more than intensity when building long-term financial habits. Once you choose your first small win, commit to doing it for 30 days without negotiating or second-guessing the decision. 30 days is enough time to prove to yourself that you can follow through and build discipline even without dramatic results. After those 30 days, evaluate calmly whether the habit felt easy, manageable, difficult, or surprisingly empowering in your daily routine. If the habit felt sustainable, continue it for another month and consider adding one additional small win that complements your progress. For example, if you saved $20 weekly, maybe add an extra $10 weekly or reduce one small discretionary expense monthly. Stacking habits slowly is far more effective than attempting a massive financial overhaul that collapses within 2 exhausting weeks. This stacking process eventually forms a complete financial system, built entirely on tiny choices instead of overwhelming commitments. Over time, the system becomes automatic because your identity reinforces the behavior, making saving feel natural instead of forced. Most people fail financially because they rely on motivation, which is temporary, instead of identity, which is permanent and reliable. Identity-based saving is powerful because it transforms saving from something you occasionally do into something you inherently are. Once your identity shifts, you no longer debate every small purchase because your internal system already knows how to respond. This removes emotional friction, which is the number one reason people break financial habits, especially during stressful moments. Reducing friction matters because friction destroys consistency, and consistency is the only pathway toward compounding results long term. Now, let's discuss what most people misunderstand about wealth because they often focus on income instead of behavior and time. Income helps, but behavior multiplies income and time multiplies behavior, which is why wealthy people obsess over small percentages. Most financially successful people did not start wealthy, but they mastered small wins early and allowed compounding to do the rest. Here's an extremely important truth that can reshape your mindset this year, which is that time matters more than contribution amount. Someone investing $50 monthly for 30 years usually ends with more than someone investing $150 for 10 years. The difference is time, because time multiplies discipline while short bursts of motivation create minimal, long-lasting results. This is the secret advantage people rarely talk about because the earlier you start, the less money you actually need overall. But even if you start later, you're not behind. You simply need consistency because compounding still works powerfully at any age. People in their 30s still have decades of compounding ahead, and people in their 40s and 50s still benefit immensely from consistency. The belief that you are behind is one of the most damaging financial myths because it kills motivation before action even begins. You are not behind. You are just starting, and starting is the only requirement for future financial transformation. Start where you are with what you have, and trust that discipline and time will do far more than you expect. Your goal is not perfection, but progress, because progress compounds while perfection prevents you from beginning altogether. Every financially successful person you admire began messy, inconsistent, confused, and anxious, but they continued showing up anyway. Small wins allowed them to build momentum, and momentum began reshaping their identity decisions and long-term financial direction. The people who stay broke usually quit during this early phase because they expect dramatic progress instead of gradual compounding. But the people who become financially stable accept that slow progress is still progress, especially when combined with patience. Now let's talk about emergency funds because they prevent small problems from turning into expensive disasters quickly. Even $500 can prevent credit card debt during minor emergencies, which saves you hundreds in interest long term. $1,000 can prevent emotional panic, which protects your health decisions and ability to think clearly during crises. A 3-month emergency fund creates true financial breathing room, allowing you to navigate job loss, illness, or unexpected bills confidently. Building this fund does not require massive income. It requires predictable habits formed through repeated small wins every month. The more breathing room you have, the more strategic your decisions become because urgency no longer controls your thinking. Once you escape survival mode, you unlock higher quality long-term decision-making, which leads to significantly better financial outcomes. This is why small wins matter because they move you out of survival mode and into strategy mode where wealth is actually built. Wealth cannot grow without mental clarity, and mental clarity cannot exist without at least some form of financial stability. Now, let's discuss how saving affects your earning potential, because most people underestimate how connected these two things truly are. When you are desperate financially, you accept low pay, poor treatment, and stressful work environments because you have no alternatives. But when you have savings, you can negotiate confidently because you are not terrified of losing your job immediately. You can apply to better opportunities, leave toxic workplaces, and invest in skills that increase your long-term earning power. Savings create career flexibility. And career flexibility eventually increases income because you no longer choose based on fear. This is how saving indirectly raises your income because confidence decisions and opportunities always follow financial stability. Many people believe wealthy individuals earn more because they are lucky, but they often earn more because they had financial margin early. Margin gives you the power to say no, and every powerful decision in life begins with the ability to say no confidently. Without margin, you say yes to everything, even when it harms your health, finances, or long-term goals because desperation forces compliance. With margin, you choose intentionally, and intentional choices eventually create the long-term outcomes you have always wanted. Now let's talk about mindset, because financial transformation requires changing how you think before changing how you spend. Instead of asking whether you can afford something, ask whether the purchase supports your future or steals from it quietly. Instead of asking how much something costs, ask how much it prevents you from investing toward long-term security. Instead of seeing saving as sacrifice, see it as paying your future self, who will desperately appreciate your discipline later. Mindset shifts like these make saving feel empowering instead of restrictive, because you understand the deeper purpose behind your choices. You stop comparing yourself with people who overspend because you recognize most financial flexing hides quiet financial stress. You stop trying to impress people who are not responsible for your bills, your emergencies, or your long-term stability. You begin prioritizing peace over appearance because peace lasts while appearance constantly demands more money to maintain. Peace becomes the goal, and savings create peace in a world where uncertainty can strike at any moment unexpectedly. Now let's address a common fear many people have, which is the belief that small contributions will never make a meaningful difference. This fear exists because you see your starting position, not your future potential, and assume your current situation defines everything. But your financial future is shaped by habits, not starting points, because habits compound far more than income or luck. What matters is not how much you save today, but that you save something today, because something compounds while nothing cannot. Even $5 weekly becomes meaningful over decades, because compounding transforms tiny beginnings into surprisingly large outcomes. The most important part is that you build the identity and system that makes saving automatic instead of optional. Once saving becomes automatic, everything else becomes easier because the hardest part is always starting and staying committed early. When your identity aligns with your actions, your financial transformation becomes inevitable because your behavior reinforces your goals. At this point, the question is no longer whether you can save, but how far your savings will grow over time. Money stops feeling scarce because you have proof that you can generate stability through discipline instead of fear. You stop relying on hope and start relying on habits because habits are consistent while hope is unpredictable and fragile. You discover that saving is not about restriction, but about creating options because options give you control over your life. Control is one of the greatest financial benefits you will ever experience because control creates peace, confidence, and opportunity. When you control your money, you control your decisions, and when you control your decisions, you control your future. The greatest lie people believe is that financial transformation requires huge income, instead of small, consistent behavior repeated patiently. But the truth is that small wins repeated for years outperform almost every large win attempted once out of desperation. Behavior beats brilliance because brilliance is rare, while behavior is available to anyone willing to commit consistently. Wealth is not a moment, it is a system, because systems create predictable results while moments create temporary excitement. Your small wins are building a system that will support you emotionally, financially, and psychologically for decades to come. Even if your progress feels slow, remember that slow progress compounded becomes unstoppable progress when given enough time. Consistency is the multiplier of every financial habit, and time is the multiplier of consistency, making them the ultimate combination. Your job is not to predict the future, but to build habits that guarantee you benefit from whatever future arrives. And small wins guarantee growth because small wins are the most sustainable form of financial progress any person can create. Now, let's talk about your next steps because clarity drives action, and action creates the results you want long-term. Identify one small win. You can begin today something so simple that you will not quit even on stressful, difficult days. Commit to this win for 30 days because 30 days builds identity, and identity builds long-term sustainable behavior naturally. After 30 days, stack a second win, then a third, and watch how your financial stability begins increasing consistently each month. Each win will reinforce your confidence, and each layer of confidence will strengthen your ability to save for the long term. When you look back after a few months, you will be shocked. by how much more stable and in control you feel. And when you look back after several years, you will realize you created real wealth through tiny decisions repeated patiently. None of this requires massive income lottery luck or perfect timing. It only requires consistency with small, sustainable habits. The sooner you start these habits, the more powerful compounding becomes, because time rewards those who respect discipline. Whether you start with $5, $10, or $50 does not matter, because consistency multiplies everything eventually. You do not need to wait for stability to begin, because beginning is what creates your future stability over time. Your future self is depending on you to begin today, even if the first step feels tiny, small, or insignificant. Small steps eventually become large transformations when repeated enough times with patience, trust, and internal commitment. You are far more capable of financial change than your current circumstances suggest, because behavior always beats circumstances long term. You deserve the peace that savings provide you, deserve the confidence that discipline builds, and you deserve the stability you are creating. Your money can work for you, but only if you consistently give it the opportunity to grow, multiply, and compound. Wealth is built slowly then suddenly, because years of invisible progress eventually become visible in dramatic, powerful ways. You will realize one day that your small wins were never small, because they were the foundation of everything you built. And when that moment arrives, you will thank your past self for choosing discipline over comfort and consistency over excuses. Your journey begins with one small win, one simple choice repeated daily until it becomes a permanent part of your identity. Do not underestimate the power of small wins, because small wins are the quiet engine behind every long-term success story. You are not behind and you are not stuck. You are simply one disciplined month away from changing your financial direction. Start today, because time will pass regardless, and your future will reflect the habits you build right now. Saving even a tiny amount today is an act of hope, discipline, and self-respect that pays dividends for decades. Pay yourself first consistently, because your future self will thank you for every single small win you commit to now. And if this message helped shift your perspective, share it with someone you care about and subscribe for more guidance ahead.